It was made clear from the start that I was to study theology in order to trap a suitable mate, marry, reproduce, and live the life of a wife and mother. That was my destiny. I was fine with that until I hit my teens and started to question most of what I had been told. This, in the long run, led up to what I like to refer to as the Great Family Breakdown of 2000. I was 18 and had my mind set on 1. Not study theology, 2. Spend a year backpacking and working in interesting places, 3. Eventually come back home and become a vet, possibly never marry, or have kids. This of course resulted in first my father, then my entire family disowning me. Well, mostly because of the not reading theology bit, but you get the general circumstance under which I grew up. So naturally, I also picked up smoking out of pure spite. The rebellious streak really appealed to teenage me. Okay, so, in the spring of 2000, I set out on my adventure. I had a very undetailed plan. Travel through Italy, France, see the romantic, historical places, continue to England, and sip on an overly priced but very, I assumed, sophisticated plastic cup of coffee while enjoying the slow turning of the London Eye. The plan was to get odd jobs along the way. It seemed so easy in all the movies I had seen since breaking free of my overly religious family. I was, to sum it up, a very naive 18-year-old girl with no life experience. In June, I arrived in Italy. I had almost no money left and did what came natural to me in times of need. I turned to the closest church. It was a beautiful day, a beautiful church, and I enjoyed the chilly air inside the stone walls when I became aware that I was being watched. I turned around and saw a nice-looking man in his late 20s smiling gently at me and asking something in Italian. His English was almost as bad as my Italian, but we managed to introduce ourselves as Gabriella and Franco. Franco, it turned out, was some sort of volunteer, keeping the church and its surroundings tidy. He invited me to a garden barbecue that evening, with people from the church choir, and it was a wonderful experience. Soon I had a job helping a gardener, and life was wonderful. The people were welcoming and sweet, and I started to learn a little Italian. It was like one of those movies. But some days, when I went into the church in the late afternoon to light a candle and admire the great artworks, I could feel Franco watching me in a way that I was not entirely comfortable with. What made me go from finding him charming to slightly unnerving was how he held one hand on the back of my neck when we walked out of the church that first afternoon. Something about that made me uneasy in my admittedly limited experience. You hold another person's hand, rest a hand on their arm, possibly even on the small of their back. But the back of the neck? It felt strange and I disliked it right away, but disregarded my first impression with the fact that I did not know their customs. Then I got used to it, thinking it must just be their ways. He was always polite and even shy in our awkward conversations. often avoiding direct eye contact and keeping his distance whenever anyone else was there. When in company, he would become almost invisible, shrinking into himself. It was strange to see, and I thought maybe it's some sort of social phobia. Perhaps he had been given the job there because he had some sort of invisible handicap that made it hard for him to function in a social setting. When others were around, he became someone else, much more introverted and elusive. Weeks went by and he started to hang out close to where I worked. He was often close by when I took my evening walks, and I started to get the lingering feeling that something was not right with him. But I didn't fear him, and didn't wish to seem rude. When I had let several days pass without returning to the church, he came to the house where I rented a room to ask for me, and wondered if perhaps I was ill, since I had not turned up for our evening walks. In retrospect, this should have made me pack my bags and get on a bus. But remember, I was a very naive person at this time. So instead, when he held out a hand to invite me for a walk, I took it, ignoring the feeling of danger that started to bruise somewhere deep inside my chest. We walked past the place where the bus usually stops, where I usually turn around to walk back home, because there's nothing more to see down that road. As soon as we were away from the busier streets, his hand let go of mine and he placed it instead on the back of my neck, mumbling Italian words at a pace I could not follow or comprehend. I tried being polite and nice, turning into the friendly, nice girl that I was brought up to be. It had no effect as to ease his iron grip or slow him down, and soon we were on a lonely street that I remembered led to a closed dairy factory. You would have thought that my instincts would kick in now, right? Yeah, I wish. I thought that I could cure his sudden aggressive behavior with a friendly, polite manner and charm. I know it sounds almost insane how I just let this happen, but remember that I was trained from toddlerhood to be a nice girl, to not fuss, not raise my voice. I found my voice that day. It took some time, I admit that, but when I found myself backed up against the concrete wall of a dark and empty factory house, and saw the hostile look in his eyes as he pulled a small knife out of his pocket, I completely flipped. I screamed, scratched, kicked and clawed. It was a kind of knife that you use for opening boxes, small and thin, but probably dangerous enough nonetheless. He was so shocked by my sudden violent fit that he dropped it, and I took my chance to run. I didn't care where I ran, I just ran, like a crazed animal, all the while screaming unarticulated nonsense. I lost both my sandals, but kept running. I didn't even look over my shoulder to see if I was even chased. I just ran. I reached the first house on the street and threw myself at the door, knocking, kicking, shouting until it opened, and a terrified young mom, the teacher in the village, let me in. I didn't report it to the police. I left the next day on the first bus. But I regret that decision today. At the time, I was too embarrassed and ashamed to talk to the police, and it would take time to get a translator to do it properly anyway. I just wanted to go. It was a very frightening experience, but I did learn something fundamentally important. If needed, never hesitate to fight with everything you've got. You can't make a predator go away with being nice and polite. So back in 2011, I was 18 and had just graduated high school and had started my first job. Telemarketer, if anyone is interested. So on one hand, I was loving life because I was rich. And on the other hand, I was still as stingy as ever with my money, and used to buy monthly bus tickets that were prepaid, rather than buying tickets daily. This worked out to be a hell of a lot cheaper. Anyways, to get to work, I would catch 2 buses, and on the way home I would catch a train, as it was generally quicker. One evening after work I was sick with the flu, and had the whole pale face, puffy eyes, and big red nose from wiping. Not only does that tell you how hot I looked, I also had my hair in a messy, oily bun. I was sitting at my local train station, waiting for the bus to take me home at around 6 p.m. and had been there only a few minutes when I noticed a man walk up to where I was, look around, and then stand about a meter away. I only half noticed this, as it wasn't really anything worth noticing, and I could only see him out of my peripheral vision. So I sat there on my phone and continued to browse Facebook, no doubt, when I realized that I could see him staring at me out of the corner of my eye. Like a full-on, intent stare. I will never forget his face in my life. He looked possibly Egyptian, or maybe even Spanish. His skin was dark olive, and he had what I have always guessed to be acne scars covering his face. This made me very nervous, and I did not think for a second he might find me attractive or whatnot. My first conclusion was that he was going to steal my phone. He wasn't dressed scummy or anything. If I had to guess, I would say he was in his early 30s, possibly 5'9", and was wearing a business-type suit. So, not sure why I felt as though he might have wanted to take my phone. I guess I just sensed bad intentions. After noticing how long he'd been staring at me, and after a few returned glances at him for confirmation, I slowly put my phone in my pocket, to which, apparently, was an invitation to approach me. "Excuse me," he asked. "How long have you been here for?" I was a tad taken aback by the question, as I wasn't really sure what he was getting at. "Not long. Maybe 5 or so minutes," I responded. He smiled at me and moved closer, sort of getting in my face, which made me uncomfortable for obvious reasons. Also, that I was extremely unwell. "Oh, well, I'm just waiting for a friend." "Have you seen a man in a white t-shirt and blue jeans?" he asked. "No, I haven't. As I said, I haven't been here long and don't really take notice of my surroundings." I laughed as I said this. He then started to converse with me, telling me that he had come to pick up his friend, and had apparently been stood up. I told him to give his friend a call, to which he responded that he wasn't answering. I wished him luck, relieved that he wasn't a creep, and thought that'd be the end of it. Apparently not. He then asked me several questions, such as if I'd go on a date with him. I told him I had a boyfriend, which was true. He asked how old I thought he was, to which I answered 27. He looks more like 30, so I thought I'd drop a few years and give him a compliment. He gave me a huge smile and told me he was 40 and a teacher at a high school around 20 minutes away from where I lived. The man asked me if I'd date anyone his age, and I told him that it was unlikely, as I was 18 and he was basically my father's age. And while my boyfriend is a bit older than me, he's a hell of a lot closer to my age. He continued to ask me questions such as what I would do to control a class, which I answered honestly, that I'd keep them all in for detention if one of them played up, which generally worked for my class, although unfair. I continued to chat with him, because even though I was slightly uncomfortable, he wasn't saying anything wrong, and he seemed like a charming, maybe slightly over-friendly person. So I just kept adding in little comments about my boyfriend every now and then to keep things clear between us. The conversation went on for at least 20 minutes, and when he would say anything about taking me out, he would then change the subject and ask more random questions, such as one about controlling a class. So I guess that is what made me feel more comfortable, that he didn't push the date thing, and kept most of the conversation much the same as any normal chat I have had via public transport with a stranger. Apart from feeling a slight sense of unease, and I don't know how other to describe it, but almost a darkness radiating from his eyes. Not so much color, but almost a soulless look that I have seen only a few times in other people, and for a good reason. When he asked me where I lived, I had a slight freak out, as I am a terrible liar, especially back then. I thought quickly of how I was going to answer him without looking like I was concerned, and quickly spat out that I lived near the local TAFE, which was a few blocks from my house, but in the opposite direction of where I was. He responded that he lived in the Redacted, which was the next suburb over, and goes past there on his way home. I actually lived before the TAFE. "Oh no, it's okay," I quickly spluttered. "I have a monthly bus ticket that needs to be used. I've been getting a lot of lifts home lately and don't want to waste my money." This was semi-true. He continued to put light pressure on me to get in the car with him, when suddenly my bus showed up. At this point it was dark. I told him it was my bus and that I had to go, so I quickly said goodbye and jumped on the bus. At this, he ran to his car, which was parked illegally inside the bus station, where the buses go, rather than where the car park is, and started his car. This is when I started to get scared and wonder whether he was going to follow me home. It was only a 10-minute trip on the bus, and then only 1.5 streets to my house. The whole trip, I wondered whether I was being silly and whether he was just a normal person who was trying to pick up, or whether he had something more sinister in mind. I wasn't going to take any chances, and as soon as I got off the bus, I bolted home as fast as I could without turning back once. When I got home, I demanded to be picked up from the station every day after what had happened. because one of the questions he also asked me, which rang in my head, was whether I was at the station at the same time every day, which I stupidly answered I was. Fast forward, a year and a bit later. I was 19 and had a different job, and lived out of him with my boyfriend at the time. I was going back home from visiting my parents at around 3 p.m. and was at said station on the opposite side waiting for my bus when I saw a car park in the middle of the station, again illegally. I glanced up and saw a man get out of his car. Then a wave of fear rushed over me. I was pretty sure it was the same guy. I looked down quickly, as making eye contact generally attracts crazies to come and talk to you. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, look around as if he was looking for someone, until his eyes stopped at me and he made a beeline towards me. My heart started racing, as I couldn't believe this was happening, and was questioning whether it was him or not. He approached me with a smile, this time wearing casual clothing, and as soon as I looked in his eyes, I knew for sure it was him. "Hi," he smiled at me. "Have you been here long?" A wave of nostalgia rushed over me, and my heart started to race. "Not long. Why?" I asked curtly. "Well, have you seen a guy with a white t-shirt and blue jeans? I was just waiting for a friend and he hasn't shown up." I looked at him in utter disbelief and told him I hadn't. He then started telling the story about being stood up again until I cut him off as my bus showed up, 5 minutes early. "Gotta go, bye," I said bluntly, and walked onto the bus and started heading towards the back. I sat down and got my phone ready to call my boyfriend and tell him what had happened, when something caught my eye at the front of the bus. It was him. He had actually gotten on the bus and started looking around. I just about died inside at this point, until he jumped off and in his car. I called my boyfriend instantly and told him what had happened. This trip was a lot longer, so I didn't feel concerned that he'd follow me. Also, it was daytime. I wasn't even scared this time. I was just furious as I realized this was his thing, and he must have done it to many girls, and I wondered if any girls had actually accepted his offer and taken the lift home. I didn't call the police, as he had actually done nothing wrong, so I didn't think much of it other than the guy was a complete weirdo, and eventually forgot about it. 2 years later, when I was 21, I was living back in the original suburb where I had met him, with a friend at the local shopping center. After we had finished shopping, I walked across the road to the library where the bus home was, which was the same bus I was catching the time I first saw him. I stopped dead center in the middle of the road. I grabbed my friend's arm roughly and just repeated, "Oh my God, oh my God." He was talking to a young girl whose age I couldn't tell, but looked somewhere between 16 to 24. I told my friend I would explain, and told her to wait over to the side. There were a few people at this bus stop, maybe like 5 to 6, as more than one bus stopped at the library. I didn't know what to do, but realized I should intervene, as I felt the intentions of this man weren't good, but I wasn't really sure what I could do. As he was talking to this girl, I went up behind her and tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, sorry, but can I please speak to you?" She looked a little bewildered but asked if everything was okay. I said everything was okay. I just needed to speak to her in private and asked her to follow me. She allowed me to pull her a little away from him. I whispered that we needed to go further until we were about 4 meters away. She still looked a little weirded out. "Sorry to be weird. I just need to tell you about that guy," I said quickly. I told her my story and her mouth hung open. "He said the exact same thing to me," she whispered. At this point, my friend was standing with us. He really seemed off to me. I was kind of scared, but don't know why. I just didn't know how to get away from him. She told us she was catching the same bus as us, so I told her to jump on and sit with us. The whole time we were talking, this guy was giving me the most murderous look, which I gave back. While we were talking, my friend happened to ask where he was, just as he was walking behind me, to which I shushed her. He walked just a little away from us, never taking his eyes off us, still giving us a look of death, and started making phone calls. I couldn't make out what he said and just tried to ignore him. My friend, the girl, and I then watched him power walk to a car about half a street down in the car park and drove off. The three of us jumped on the bus. My phone was dead, and I urged the girl to call Crime Stoppers and the local police station just in case one of the above didn't take her seriously. And I told her we'd do the same. We realized we didn't know what car he drove other than it was silver, and we couldn't see the number plate. But luckily my friend had noticed what he was wearing, which was a pink polo shirt with black stripes and light blue jeans. We wished the girl luck and went on our way. When I got home, I called both places, and they both didn't seem like they cared, as I assured them he hadn't done anything, but it seemed like that was his tactic. To not actually do anything forceful, but more gently persuade. And I told the operator that I was reporting him for being suspicious more than anything. About a week later, I received a phone call from a man that told me he was a constable at a crime investigation place located in the city. I can't remember what he said, but he was something higher than a normal officer. He asked me a few more questions about the events and asked if I had any other things that could identify him. I told him that I didn't, and he told me to call the police on site if I ever saw him again. "What if he's doing something innocent like shopping?" I asked. He told me to call no matter what, as he felt that this person was the man they were looking for. This chilled me to the bone, and I wondered what this man had done, even though his actions gave me a good idea of what it could have been. I am yet to see the man again, and hope that I never do. When I was accepted into a college that was far away from my hometown, I didn't really know anyone else who lived there. The college I went to didn't have dorms, but they did have apartments that they suggested students live in due to the proximity to the college. And I'm sure they got a kickback from people who signed up and said they heard about the apartment complex through the college. I was pretty broke at that point. Plus, I wanted to meet some new people right away. So I chose my apartment largely due to a roommate matching service they had. Basically, you fill out a questionnaire about your demographics and hobbies, interests, and the service would match you with roommates that were compatible with you. Mind you, I chose this particular apartment, despite the 1-star reviews I saw across the board online. I mean, they were under new management, and it was only a year lease. It couldn't be that bad. I was matched with another guy in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. I was so excited to move in and meet him. I moved in a few days after the lease started, probably about 3 weeks before school started, and already began regretting my decision. The apartment was shit and smelled like mold and old cigarettes. In fact, there was a used ashtray on the coffee table when I first got there. When they said it was furnished, I didn't expect it to be exactly like home. My new roommate didn't show up for about a week. When he did finally show up, I found out he was about 35 and didn't even go to my school. He was pretty scruffy and smelled like old cigarettes and BO. Eventually I found out that he used to be homeless and took out student loans to afford the application fee and the first few months' rent. But he never enrolled in classes. After the first few months he stopped paying rent, and it took about 6 months for the property to finally evict him. In the state I lived, you had to evict judicially, and the courts were bogged down, so it took a little while. While he lived in my apartment, he never changed his clothes. He always wore the same beat-up looking camo pants and stained dirty wife beater. I even offered him some clothes I was getting rid of that would have fit him fine. He was content though, so whatever. He would also have a lot of his old roommates, or when he lived at homeless shelters over. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to come home to find a random person doing laundry, even when my roommate wasn't home. When I would have a guy over to hang out in my room, I'm gay, he would watch us walk from the front door to my room, through a crack in his door just wide enough for me to see the creepiest look on his face. Literally, every time. Needless to say, he gave me the creeps. A few months after school started, and after I was noticing his creepy behavior more and more, I was in my room asleep with the guy I was talking to at the time. Actually still my boyfriend now. When I hear a knock on my bedroom door. I look to the clock, and it's about 3 in the morning. I get up to go see what whoever it was wanted, and open my door to a random, dirty and old, naked guy. He says he's a friend of my roommate, and thought my roommate was in my room with me. I flipped the fuck out. Obviously my roommate isn't in my room with me. In order to get into my apartment, my roommate would have to have let him in. And the apartment isn't very big, so it wasn't like my roommate could have gone somewhere else that his friend wouldn't know where he was. He was either in the living room or in his room. I throw this dude out, him being butt-ass naked, and let myself into my roommate's room. This is the first time I've been in there, mainly because I have no reason to associate with him. And he's sitting in the corner doing absolutely nothing with the lights off. Almost as if he was waiting for me to come in there. I ask him about everything that just happened, and he tries to play dumb like he didn't even know the guy. Someone had to let him in, and it wasn't me. I drop it, begrudgingly, because the eviction notices are piling up on his door. I figure it's just a matter of time until he's gone. In the meantime, I see the naked dude randomly in the apartment doing laundry. A handful of times when I would get home from class. Finally, my roommate is evicted, and I think I'm done with that. And maybe we'll get another roommate that is actually my age, or cool. A few weeks go by that are more or less quiet. Then, one day, I hear a knock at the front door during the day. When I answer it, I see the random naked dude standing there. Thankfully clothed this time, with a trash bag full of what looked like disgusting laundry. He tells me that my roommate said it was cool if he came to use the washer, and starts to walk forward like he owns the place. I step in front of him and tell him that his friend doesn't live there anymore, and no, he can't use my washing machine. I close the door and lock it and go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I keep hearing a random noise from the balcony. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird out there scratching around. I keep hearing the noise, so I decide to investigate, and I see the homeless guy trying his best to climb up to my balcony. I told him I was calling the cops, but obviously, by the time they get there, he's gone. That same day, I went to the property manager and asked what kind of roommate matching service works like that, and demanded to get out of my lease. After some heated discussion, I persuaded her that it was probably in her best interest to just let me leave. I found a nice 1-bedroom and never looked back.